I'd like to welcome all of you and introduce myself first. I am Nick Wendling. I'm currently serving on active duty. I just graduated from Columbia School of General Studies with a master's in financial economics and commissioned as a brand new Navy officer. And as someone that took advantage of the GS scholarship while I was there, I want to say thank you to our donors and everyone that supports us, as well as the Yellow Ribbon program. As you know, we have over 500 veterans currently attending full-time classes at Columbia, and your support means a great deal to us. So thank you very much. Welcome to everybody else. I see that we have everyone in attendance tonight, a little bit of everyone, alumni, donors, and supporters, deans, and current students. We're going to have a great discussion tonight. And just wanted to now let Jason Dempsey and Keren Yarhi-Milo introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jason Dempsey, a 2008 graduate of school, GSAS actually. Got my doctorate at Columbia. I'm now back, very fortunate to be here, helping run the Center for Veteran Transition and Integration. Wrapped up a 22-year career a few years ago. I have a lot of deep, lasting ties and love the mission of Columbia. So I'm happy to be here and happy to discuss the way forward with the crowd tonight. Thanks.
I'm Keren Yarhi-Milo. I'm a professor in the Political Science Department and the School of International and Public Affairs. I'm also the director of the Saltzman Institute of War and Peace Studies at Columbia. I graduated from the School of General Studies, class of 2003. Very, very proud to be here with you for this. I was on scholarship as a student, and so I have a deep appreciation and gratitude for the donors here who support GS, and I could not have done this and I could not have launched my career without that support. So I can tell you, I very much appreciate it. I very much appreciate it. I grew up in Israel. I served in the IDF, in the intelligence branch before coming to Columbia. And if you look at my area of research, I study intelligence and foreign policy, international security, writ large, and I'm very happy to be with you today and talk to you a little bit about my experience at Columbia and the military and how those worlds have, for me, how how they two kind of, are together in everything that I do. So thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And again, thank you both for coming tonight and agreeing to speak on these topics. It's something that hits home with all of us, obviously, as we have very unique paths to Columbia, but we all have the common bond of our GS story and coming from military to a non-traditional route to Columbia GS, and it's something that really is meaningful to us. So why don't we start off with that? How did you first find academia and more specifically Columbia?
Who would you like to answer that, Nick? All right. I'll assume we're going alphabetical. All right.
Let's assume that. Okay.
Hey, so for me, as I was trying to remember how this all happened, I would say a lot of it was, one, it was stumbling and not really knowing what I was getting into. And it was a lot of great support from a whole host of both Columbia alumni, military veterans who'd been at Columbia, and then the great group of professors at Columbia. When I was thinking about all this, I had just finished what I call the Peter Pan phase of my life, which was my 20s, where, my job was to jump out of airplanes and patrol jungles in Panama, and all that culminated, running a tank company across the deserts along the border with Iraq and Kuwait. Long enough ago that that was when we used to believe in deterrence, but we can talk about that later. But as I was ending that phase in my life, I had a choice of, do I want to do more of the same or there was a great program that the Army runs and has a great long-term relationship with Columbia University, where they said, hey, do you want to come to West Point and teach? And if you do, we'll send you to school for a couple of years, pick up at least a master's degree, then come teach. And I had a few friends and mentors who'd been Columbia PhD students or graduates. And one of them reached out and he's like, dude, you can do all this in 2 years. It's not a big deal. I still haze him about that to this day, but he was really looking for a study buddy in the PhD program, but he convinced me to come in and try to do all my coursework and comps and everything. And I love it. It was a fantastic experience, really changed the trajectory, both of my military career and my post-military career. And again, it was due to a lot of historical support that Columbia gives the military community and a lot of great mentors who kind of guided me into something that I really didn't know what I was doing.
I found Columbia, but academia found me. So in the way that it worked, that since a very early age, for a variety of reasons, I was somewhat obsessed with Columbia, even as a high school, even in the middle school. I came and I toured, and I have a bulletin of the courses that I wanted to take. I always thought I would end up being an ambassador, because I've been interested in international relations my entire life, but never thought that I would actually end up at Columbia, even as a student, let alone as a faculty later on. And I didn't necessarily think I would end up in academia. But when I came to New York and I joined GS, this was when I started taking classes in political science, and it all came together. I took classes with Professor Bob Jervis, who's still to this day my colleague and my mentor, and he teaches international relations, security, as some of the students here might have taken classes with him. So for me, the idea of wanting to be in academia only kind of started at Columbia. In fact, I'm probably not a very good example of the 5-year program. I actually enrolled in the 5-year GS CPA, thinking that I would want to be just doing policy. And I started my first year at CPA, and then I realized I cannot really write 5-page policy memos without understanding the theories, the data, the evidence. And for that, my mentor, Jervis, looked at me and said, so you need to go to do a PhD. And still, only during the PhD program, I realized this is what it means to be in academia. I didn't really think about it. But obviously the interest in political science, in international security, in all of those classes, it came and it clicked because of, to a large degree, because of my experience and what I had been doing previously during my service in the intelligence branch. And I brought it with me into my research, and I'm happy to talk about it. I know it's coming.
Great, thank you so much. And Jason, I want to go back to what you said a little bit more about getting hazed or hazing someone for telling you to do the program in 2 years. And if I understood correctly, you were teaching at West Point and in classes at the same time at Columbia. Is that correct?
Almost. He was correct. I was able to finish all my courses about the same time. Keren graduated in 2003, had done comps, and then it was just a simple matter of actually writing the dissertation that I got to do while being fully employed somewhere else. It was awesome.
Okay, well, that's actually what I wanted to know, because I feel like a lot of the veterans that attend Columbia now do work and go to school to help pay for college and to subsist in New York City, a very expensive city to live in. And my question is how did your military experience and background in your Peter Pan days, as you put it, prepare you for the juggle between going to classes and also handling teaching courses at West Point?
I'll say it was exceptionally hard, right? There's Um, it's surprising, just the power of being organized, and it's funny because academics a lot of times aren't, but to get done, you have to be, right? You have to be very mission focused. The joke is always, the best dissertation is a done dissertation. And I do remember being with a lot of my PhD classmates who went from 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 beyond years. And just like, man, just sit down and write something. It doesn't matter what you write, just write something. And so in some ways, having a job and being way oversubscribed helped me just get stuff done because I had to prioritize. It also taught me a little bit about only doing what I truly loved. I think a lot of PhD students at the time, at least, were thinking, oh, well, which way is the discipline going? What should I study to go here, do this? And for me, one, I had a job, so I had a little bit of a luxury of, being in the Army and being employed. But two, there was this idea that, if I was going to work a full day and be up till 2:30 in the morning, writing my dissertation, if I was going to be getting ready to deploy to Afghanistan, getting up and writing from 3:30 to 5:30 to finish my work, if I was going to be in Afghanistan between jobs and taking 12 hours to edit my book before it went to draft, the only way that was possible was I absolutely believed in what I was writing, was super engaged in it, and I knew I had to get it out. So you can't fake it. You can't fake it anywhere. You can't fake it in academia. And if you truly love what you're doing, or if if you're really invested in either the project or the mission, you find a way to get stuff done.
Excellent. Thank you. That's really valuable insights. And also, I just want to say thank you to Michael and Stephen in the chat are putting in there a little bit about their experience. So thank you for joining us tonight. I understand that you won't be able to stay for the whole time, but we really appreciate you participating and joining us for the chat. And Keren, I wanted to circle back to you, which is also a military term, circle back. And I wanted to talk on a little bit more on the differences. You said that you decided that the 5-year program wasn't for you, and that you decided to do your PhD, and you had a little bit of advice on how to decide. But how did your military experience help you to really hone in and focus on, okay, now I need to pick a path and lean into it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a few things. So first of all, the military experience, what it brought for me is a kind of a passion, and in terms of understanding why I'm studying the questions that I'm studying. And in my world, when I study international security and I research foreign policy, decision making, the experience kind of gave me this, anchored me. This is why I'm doing it. I had it always in the back of my mind that the questions that I research really matter, because I knew they matter based on my experience. So that's the first thing. I think I was also working part-time during school. Obviously, I relate not to the same extent as Jason. His experience is very intense. Mine was much less so, but it does bring the idea that you need to be more focused, but it also brought confidence. So even as an undergrad, the experience of working with people who are older, who are much more knowledgeable, made me feel really comfortable going and approaching professors and sitting in office hours and have a discussion about current affairs. And that to me was very valuable. It brought up the best that you can have in a Columbia experience if you just allow yourself to go and approach people. And I had this confidence from my military service. But I think that the reason I felt more comfortable in academia is because the particular kind of military service that I had, in a very interesting way, in a very ironic way, led me to kind of be very more careful or more research oriented, right? So if you do intelligence analysis, it teaches you how to think about how to ask questions, right? I mean, the work of intelligence is always asking, what are the known unknowns here? What are the assumptions this is built on? What are the unknown unknowns, right? And that serves you really well as a researcher, thinking about your working assumption. Another thing is that you kind of, as an intelligence officer, you kind of see patterns, right? You kind of look at the data and you're like, how do I connect the dots? I mean, intelligence is much more than connecting the dots. And that's what you do when you do social science research. You're thinking about one thing and you say, well, this is an example of what? What's the larger pattern? So in a way, I was never trained as academic in the intelligence, but the skills were there. And I found little by little, as I was writing, term papers as an undergrad, that was very similar. So being a social scientist and being an intelligence officer could kind of have some similarities, and I enjoyed that, and I enjoyed it much more than writing the policy papers that I do now, but I do them now as an academic, where I feel much more comfortable arguing for a position. So that's kind of how the military service has anchored me and guided me and gave me the tools to be a successful academic.
Thank you. That's very insightful. We had John Newmark also. Shout out to you. Thanks for joining us here today. Jason and Keren, you both have mentioned that you really found your calling and found your passion. But I wanted to know, now that at this point in your career, you're both prominent figures on this topic. But would you say that you were able to pinpoint your passion in international relations and academia and advocacy for veterans in academia? Did your passion, was that moment where you realized your passion come from the military years or from the academia years?
Well, coincidentally, the answer for me is both, and it really ties to the experience at Columbia. I showed up at Columbia my first day of classes, I think was either September 6th or 7th of 2001. And I just left the deserts, just left a very intense kind of few years in the military as an infantry company commander. And I was looking to completely unplug. And I assumed that whatever I was looking at in New York City and Columbia was going to be non-military. And I was going to be able to just kind of broaden my horizons. And, as a point of perspective, I think it was the front page of the New York Times Magazine that previous week was all about some socialite in the Hamptons who'd gotten drunk and backed their car into a bunch of people who were waiting to get into a party. And that was like the main story. It was the front page. And I took two things from that. I thought, one, I need to figure out where the hell the Hamptons are, and what are they? And I thought that was going to be my focus, for the next few years. I was doing stupid stuff. I signed up for Chinese class. I was doing all kinds of weird things. I thought I was going to, completely divorce from the military. And then, of course, my second day of classes, 9/11 happened. And for me, it was a foundational experience because everything, all the world's attention was on New York, but more importantly, there became this, all of a sudden everybody cared about, well, what is the military, what is it doing, what can it do to protect us from this? And there was an interesting dichotomy, of course, because I was at Columbia, which was still wrapped up kind of in a 1968 narrative, a little bit internally, but externally, it was viewed by the public as this opposite pole. And so my experience from being, a student at Columbia who'd gotten here through military connections and a long legacy of serving the military, but was seen as something that was anti-military, and then being part of West Point, which was seen as kind of the paragon of military virtue, and watching not necessarily those two institutions were much closer than everybody thought, but in the public's eye, there was this huge divide. And so for me, it became very obvious what I needed to study, and I needed to study this relationship that Americans have with their military, and what does it mean, and how do people in the military think about America and American politics, and how do people outside of the military think about the military and its role in American politics. And so just the tension around that made it very obvious, and kind of the sitting in what was perceived to be one of the two poles of the American experience made me really want to dig into that and explore it more.
I could say on this question that if you look at my publication and what I've written, you could see there's almost a direct link to, at least with some of my work, not all of it, some of my publications, to my service, right? Because my first book, for example, talks about why intelligence organizations on the one hand and leaders on the other hand, when they look at the same adversary and they have the same information and they try to assess intentions, why do they reach vastly different conclusions, right? I don't have an Israel case study. And I can't say that I was thinking about this dissertation topic and I said, oh, this is from my military days, this is what I'm going to write on. It came organically from the work, the academic work, both that I was exposed to at Columbia, obviously, and here you can't really not mention 9/11, hugely transformative, especially for someone like me thinking about 9/11 as an intelligence failure. Later on, the Iraq War, like why do we get those? What's happening here? But for me, the answer is also both, right? I mean, it came from the world of international relations, but very, very much the research draws on natural insight that come from experience. So the experience doesn't inform necessarily the question, but it helps motivate it. It helps makes it real. It helps me get going and keep going because knowing that those are important questions. But a lot of what I write on secret diplomacy. Why do I write about secret diplomacy? Well, if you kind of go back again to some of the things that I was doing, it definitely involves secret diplomacy. So those questions are kind of somewhere in the back of my mind. And as I do the research and I look at the world and it connects with the literature. And also what I have been doing is kind of trying to bring intelligence studies into international relations and integrate them a little bit more, to integrate those two schools of study. And this is, again, coming from my experience. But if you really look at my CV in the publications, that will be, it kind of makes sense that given my background, I would say.
That's great. And, listening to both of your stories throughout the call so far, what I'm seeing is that, there's this common theme of this sort of like organic progression as you did transition from military to academia. And, from your experiences, this question is for both of you again, how would you frame today veteran students' role in academia, and would you say that it's a common theme for all veteran students to have that sort of organic progression, to become a bigger part of the conversation and to become a member of academia who has a good position to better inform research initiatives and then ultimately policy?
It's a somewhat difficult question, right? Because it's not necessarily linear, and there's a lot of growth that has to happen. And there's absolutely, it's great having veterans in academia, just as you want diverse perspectives across everything you study. And so, if we as Americans are going to continue to rely on military force as the number one and first tool we grab in our toolbox in every single thing we appear to do, then it does help to at least have some perspective on what that organization can and can't do. I would say for me, the big lesson and the counseling to veterans as they come in, it's remembering, one, having them in academia helps everybody understand that there is no prototypical veteran. And Americans writ large have a problem with that, right? It's a heterosexual Christian white male, who does Jason Bourne type stuff. And it's a longer conversation, but that image and that perception is corrosive to how we look at the military and how we use it, and it prevents us from being effective. So for one, you need to have folks that can give you the depth and say, oh, what is it like, Keren, to be an intel officer, and particularly in a military that's not American? Like, holy Christ, what a great experience, what a great perspective to take it outside of our American-centric look. The second part, from the veteran side, I always tell veterans, it's like, hey, great, you're the veteran. Who cares? It's great that you're a veteran, and it's great that you have a perspective, but understand that, you're one among many, and you don't represent all veterans, but you offer a slice of perspective. And in fact, it's your duty now to grow out of that N of one, like I'm the veteran, to, okay, how do I bring my veteran experience into a greater project? And we've inversed things a little bit in American culture over the last few years, where somehow the military has a prime role, when in fact, both for America and for the student veteran, you have to take that veteran experience and turn it into the larger project of advancing academia and making America a better place, as one player among many that are adding to the conversation.
I couldn't agree more, and I love the way that Jason just put it. So yes, I mean, we're very, very fortunate to be in an institution that welcomes and promotes and really know how to work with veterans. And I think that usually when you think about veterans, people kind of think immediately about international relations, questions about the use of force, but you can think across different disciplines where veterans bring a unique set of experiences, perspectives, even in anthropology, psychology, computer science, engineering, depend on what where they're coming from, what they've done. And this is where this kind of uniqueness is, and we need to stop thinking about veterans as a monolith, right? I mean, they're different people, different beliefs, different experiences. Even our research in political science shows that even on questions about the use of force, when you try to kind of do this very simplistic regression analysis and look at the, veterans versus non-veterans about, and correlate it with support for the use of force, you kind of see that the pattern really doesn't exist unless you start looking and breaking down further what type of experience you're talking about, combat experience versus non-combat, right? So we need to kind of be much more nuanced in the way we talk about this community, but in terms of what they bring to the classroom, to the discussion, there's no, it's very, very valuable. And I want us to think about that, not just in the context of political science and decisions about, using force, but across different disciplines.
That's really great. And, especially seeing as Columbia has done such a good job at creating such a diverse ecosystem of a student population. I think Dean Rosenmensch quoted Dean Alm as far as the GS population of military veterans of all nations and dancers as Uzis and tutus. And so from that vein, what do you think are some good programs and changes or differences that were made from this diverse ecosystem? And what do you think are some changes that we can make to encourage more integration between the different populations on campus?
Well, for one, I think there's a recognition nationwide that Columbia has done such a tremendous job with integrating the veteran population, both in terms of undergrad and in the graduate programs. And a lot of that, falls to Dean Rosenmetch, Dean Rogers, the whole GS team, as well as our partners in GSAS, the late, great Peter On. And I tell you, just the progression from post-2001 to today is really amazing. Just that full-on embrace and that dispelling of weird caricatures and narratives that some people had gotten tied to about, what does it mean for an academic institution to engage with the military? For us, with the center, and again, we can't do this without everybody's support. What we're really looking to do is then take now in the next step when we open up the physical space on campus later next year, is to really start taking some more of the lessons learned out of Columbia and porting them to other institutions. We already have great relationships with a lot of community colleges and helping them help veterans transition into academia, but take more of these lessons out, to the other Ivies if they want to try it, but to academia writ large. And frankly, we've been a lot focused on veterans and veteran transition and kind of the nuts and bolts of getting people to think about how to get veterans into higher ed. But what I'm really excited about as we open the center is to start hosting talks and doing more, particularly with Keren and the Saltzman Institute, to host more discussions that hit that whole panoply of topics that she addressed. What is anthropology doing with the veteran perspective? How do we, what are ways that we can study and add not just to foreign policy, but to all of academia to make it all a much richer place?
Yeah, GS especially has done a phenomenal job. And we are very lucky that Columbia is very lucky, not just to have GS, but for to have this constituency within GS. I think that definitely there are challenges, I think, in terms of financial aid. We probably should do more. Advising is also something that can be more particular to veterans and know how to work with them to help draw on their experience and expertise and try to kind of give them some guidance as to how they can translate that into research. And that you need to work with faculty who have a kind of good sense and sensitivity and kind of help those students. I think there is some questions about the politics around it and how they are perceived on campus. And I've heard, some kind of good examples and experiences and some not so much. And that is something that we need to show leadership and address and make sure that everybody feels that they can freely talk about their military experience without being ashamed for it or feel guilty about it. And that is something that I think Columbia can and should do more to address those issues when they arise. But overall, as Jason said, the Saltzman Institute is very, very committed to work with veterans, and we're going to work together. We're going to bring some of our events to the new space. We have topics like, pulling out of Afghanistan, and I can bring, and I have brought, and I will bring panels of foreign policy experts. But what is more interesting to me is to hear from the perspective of the soldiers who served in Afghanistan. And we have them on campus, and not hearing their voices and their opinions, and they might be diverse, and they are likely diverse, is something that it's not something that I want to do. I want to take advantage of it. I think it's a great resource, and we're so lucky to have many of them on campus. So things like that I'm doing as director of Saltzman more and more, and integrating it and working more closely even with the undergrads, with the GS students, and and that is just one small piece. So we've done a lot, but there's a long way. There's more that we can do and should do.
Thank you, Keren. And to continue on with what we were saying now, as far as like the perspective of the students that have actually been there, that are on campus, beyond campus, and into the future, as we look ahead, how do their perspectives then help in what you're working on in policy, and then also as a foreign policy tool beyond campus in politics even?
I think, we're at what's interesting is we're at an inflection point with America's relationship with the military. And so for me, it's very much about looking at what the next chapter is going to hold, right? Most of the veterans and everybody on this call, you've spent most of your adult lives with a military that's uncommonly revered. It's the last national institution that has the trust and confidence of the majority of American people. I think that window is coming to a close, and that we're about to enter a period where the military is no longer set up on a pedestal. And we'll have to dig into a lot of, what does that really mean? We're seeing efforts to inject partisan politics into the military in ways that we've never seen before. And that has repercussions both for domestic politics, and it has repercussions for how we fight abroad when you have decision makers, jockeying for the general who's most going to tell them what they want to hear about, whether or not we need to prioritize Iran over China, or whether or not we should abandon our adherence to the laws of armed conflict. So it's about to be exceptionally tumultuous. And so instead of avoiding it, to what Keren alluded to, is we do need to have conversations, right? Why is it that people who are protesting on one side or the other feel the need to dress up as soldiers and play an armed role mimicking the images of soldiers in our domestic political debates? Those are really hard conversations to have. But there's no better place than academia to have them and to approach them from an objective lens and really to listen to kind of all sides and figure out the way forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that what also we've seen as the kind of civil military relations writ large built a lot on this idea of institutionalized norms and what happens when those norms kind of start breaking up. And that's the kind of leads to a lot of questions that are theoretical questions and obviously have major policy implications. I study politicization of intelligence. When does it happen? Why does it happen? How successful it is, right? I mean, and maybe as Jason alluded to it, a lot of those questions will become relevant when we think about the military as well. And another thing that I'm studying now that is also kind of in that vein is this kind of public perception and the credibility of signals and cues that are coming either from the intelligence or from the military, right? Those instruments, sometimes in the intelligence, for example, is politicized mainly because there is an understanding that can cue the public to change their beliefs about a particular policy. But what if the intelligence by itself, the intelligence community, is not viewed as credible anymore or very partisan, right? What does it do to politicians using intelligence as a political tool? So all those questions are questions that I study because I'm interested in signaling and perceptions and credibility. But obviously they're very linked to what we are witnessing currently with the state of civil military relations and the role in society, and the state of intelligence policy relations and the role in shaping public discourse. So obviously a lot that is interesting to study and to discuss, and I couldn't agree more that we should be having those difficult discussions on our campus. And I think that both the Veterans Center and Saltzman are a safe space to do that. among others.
That's great. And Keren, what specifically are you working on now at the Institute in the same light?
Well, we just, so I took over last summer, and one of the first things that I've done is I started a program on, it's called the Saltzman Student Scholars. Now, it's not just for veterans, but the idea is for the Saltzman Institute to work closely with undergraduate students and to offer mentorship, to offer, we pair each scholar with a mentor. They write a blog for us. They do research assistant work. We give a lot of guidance, and there's a lot of events and programming that we do that are kind of grassroots. So they're coming from what the students want to hear about and how we can facilitate that. And then the other set of projects is that what Jason and I are working on, doing joint events and figuring out how to institutionalize that even more closely. So we have opportunities for students to come to Saltzman and hopefully feel that this is a second home, especially for those who study political science, history, or area studies, and receive this kind of hands-on mentoring and advice. And there is an application process, but I can say that for the veterans in this crowd, your experience is very relevant for what we do in Saltzman, could be very relevant. And so please, if you haven't heard about this program, I'm happy to share more information, and you should apply. I think it's very valuable as an experience.
Yeah, I remember that a couple of things that stood out about each of your military experience that you had mentioned prior was that you brought to the classroom confidence and the awareness of how to ask questions, and not afraid to raising your hand and things like these. So I remember when I showed up to Columbia at first, I saw that was an uncommon trait in some of the classes I was in as well. But I would say a large majority of the undergraduate population had no problem with that. But that is a good opportunity. And you mentioned events that the veterans that are currently on campus could get involved with. Do you want to talk about an event specifically that you have planned for the fall?
I don't know if we have anything specific yet because we don't know where we're going to be, or we haven't known where we're going to be. But I think, we will certainly, and we have discussed, we'd be remiss not to talk about, 20 years post 9/11 and the Afghan drawdown. I do think it's a moment of reflection, and hopefully we can take the conversation beyond just beyond being a commemoration, but to actually, starting some of these hard conversations and asking some hard questions, and looking at it. We've dropped a lot of the debates from earlier on, whether it was, as Karen mentioned, the politicization of intel, how we got drawn into other countries, how this all played out, how, the military became the end all be all savior, not only of, America overseas, but, briefly was seen as the savior of American democracy. I think, all that is tied together. It all flows from the same trends. And so I'm really looking forward to kicking off something that looks at Afghanistan, looks specifically at 9/11, and then hopefully we can disentangle a lot of these trends and events that have happened over the last 20 years.
I would say when I teach, I still have sometimes to beg my students to come to office hours. And I think that this is I cannot overstate how important it is. It's you really get, I get to know my students much better when they show up and talk to me. And it doesn't have to be, the perception is usually that you have to come with a question, or you have to come with with something that you didn't understand. And that's really not the case. I used to come to Bob Jervis's office to just talk to him about the Arab-Israeli peace process, and how is this a security dilemma or it's not a security dilemma, right? Things that were totally not. It's just current affairs, especially when you approach, when you take a class with a political science professor. It's really not about a question about a reading. It could be anything, and it could be just like something that you have on your mind, and you just want to exchange some ideas. As for Saltzman, I am busier than ever because there's so much programming that we're already planning for the fall. Part of it is because we're launching a new program in Saltzman that is a program, it's called Emerging Voices. It's a program for the study of intelligence and national security. And so we will have many launch events during the fall, and you will have more information. So it's going to be very busy and very interesting to kind of, for you to come and visit us in the fall. I think especially for the crowd here, the topics that we will cover are very relevant. And a lot of current policy debates and so on.
Great, thank you. And speaking of current events, we have a question in the chat. Given the increase in the focus on international relations, specifically with China, how are you navigating this environment with your students on campus? Or how do you plan to?
Jason, you want to take that, or you?
No, with not dealing with students, I'm gonna let you jump on that one.
Well, I think that those are, and it is about China, but it's not just about China, right? There are in different times, different ways that things are getting uncomfortable in some ways for students on campus. I think that the way we deal with this is in my class. So in Saltzman events and in my classes, we try as hard as we can to really create a safe space for people to feel that they can share, they can ask questions as long as they're really genuine questions and they're not just statements or opinions. It's about respect for one another. It's about really trying to figure out what is the question that we're really trying to answer, as opposed to just a forum for exchanging ideas. And you just have to do this with a lot of attention and make sure that when we talk about difficult questions, and we talk and we have to make sure that everybody feels safe and protected, and the way the discussion is being held. And it's true about China, but it's also true about other areas in the world where students have come and said that they don't feel comfortable sometimes. So there needs to be much more attention to those kinds of discussions and those kinds of voices. And I try to do this playing the devil's advocate many times. I try to do this by asking the students to take the position that is the opposite position so it's for them to play the devil's advocate. I try to never really voice my own opinion and where my politics is, to kind of allow for a more free discussion. And so there are different techniques you can use to have this discussions about sensitive issues. It's never easy, and I learn as I go along. But sometimes you have to have some of those discussions. It's important, and compared to a situation where you say, I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, I think that's really a really good point. And I think that that's a good note to end on. Again, thank you all for coming today. This event is a reunion tradition and that we typically do on campus in person, but we really appreciate you participating with us tonight via Zoom. We welcome all members of the community at this event, and in order to celebrate our veteran alumni and students. And again, thank you for all of your continued support. As someone that just graduated, it made a big difference in my life. So thank you. This is a great event, and it was an honor to be here.
Look forward to seeing everybody on campus.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye-bye.